Hi, my name is Joanna Whitney. I am an intuitive artist, a student of natural law, and an energy practitioner, and we are studying the Kybalion by the three initiates. Three initiates. And we are on the last chapter before the last chapter. Well, there's two more chapters left, I think, in this book. Um, so it's chapter 14 and it's page 93. Mental gender. Students of psychology who have followed the modern trend of thought along the lines of mental phenomena are struck by the persistence of the dual mind idea, which has manifested itself so strongly during the past 10 or 15 years, and which has given rise to a number of plausible theories regarding the nature and constitution of these two minds. So 10 or 15 years before 1908 is the late 1800s. The late Thomson J. Hudson attained great popularity in 1893 by advancing his well-known theory of the objective and subjective mind, which he held existed in every individual. So just take that for a moment. Objective and subjective. I would say that the objective mind would be subconscious and the subjective mind would be conscious, because the conscious mind is solipsistic in that it believes that its perception is truth, whereas the objective mind knows that there is truth separate from our perception. And that makes sense. That does make sense, because if you're living completely in the materialistic world, you would think that your conscious mind was all that there is. If you were polarized into the left brain, which most people are, or polarized into the right brain, then you would be unbalanced and think that your perception was truth. Which in duality, you do have your truth. That's why they say in here that all truths are but half truths, because when they're talking about the small t truth, my perception is a half truth because it doesn't have all the information, and I need the higher information, that of the all, God. In these days, when this book was written, people were still more into God. It was just the beginning of the Industrial Revolution before we became so materialistic as we are today. So, other writers have attracted almost equal attention by the theories regarding the conscious and subconscious minds, the voluntary and involuntary minds, the active and passive minds, etc. The theories of the various writers differ from each other, but there remains the underlying principle of the duality of mind. And we still have that today, and we're much more involved with it now. But yes, I think that this is true. Although I think the subconscious has a lot more to it than just being involuntary. There's a lot more going on there. The student of the Hermetic philosophy is tempted to smile when he reads and hears of these many new theories regarding the duality of mind, each school adhering tenaciously to its own pet theories and each claiming to have discovered the truth. The student turns back the pages of occult history and away back in the dim beginnings of occult teachings. He finds references to the ancient Hermetic doctrine of the principle of gender on the mental plane, the manifestation of mental gender. And examining further, he finds that the ancient philosophy took cognizance of the phenomenon of the dual mind and accounted for it by the theory of mental gender. This idea of mental gender may be explained in a few words to students who are familiar with the modern theories just alluded to. The masculine principle of mind corresponds to the so-called objective mind, conscious mind, voluntary mind, active mind. So that's opposite of what I said just now. Oh well. And the feminine principle of mind corresponds to the so-called subjective mind, subconscious mind, involuntary mind, passive mind, etc. Of course, the Hermetic teachings do not agree with the many modern theories regarding the nature of the two phases of mind, nor does it admit many of the facts claimed for the two respective aspects. Some of the said theories and claims being very far-fetched and incapable of standing the test of experiment and demonstration. We point to the phases of agreement merely for the purpose of helping the student to assimilate his previously acquired knowledge with the teachings of the Hermetic philosophy. Students of Hudson will notice that statement at the beginning of his second chapter of, quote, the law of psychic phenomena, end quote, that, quote, the mystic jargon of the Hermetic philosophers discloses the same general idea, end quote, i.e., the duality of mind. If Dr. Hudson had taken the time and trouble to decipher a little of the mystic jargon of the Hermetic philosophy, he might have received much light upon the subject of the dual mind. But then perhaps his most interesting work might not have been written. Let us now consider the Hermetic teachings regarding mental gender. The Hermetic teachers impart their instruction regarding this subject by bidding their students examine the report of their consciousness regarding their self, which is capitalized, meaning their higher self, God's self. The students are bidden to turn their attention inward upon the self dwelling within each, capital S, self, dwelling within each. Each student is led to see that his consciousness gives him first a report of the existence of his self, capitalized. The report is, I am. So in quotes, I am. This at first seems to be the final words from the consciousness, but a little further examination discloses the fact that this, quote, I am, may be separated or split into two distinct parts or aspects, which, while working in unison and in conjunction, yet nevertheless may be separated in consciousness. While at first there seems to be only an I existing, a more careful and closer examination reveals the fact that there exists an I, in quotes, and a me, also in quotes. These mental twins differ in their characteristics and nature, and an examination of their nature and the phenomenon arising from the same will throw much light upon many of the problems of mental influence. Let us begin with the consideration of the me, capitalized, which is usually mistaken for the I by the student until he presses the inquiry a little further back into the recesses of consciousness. A man thinks of his capital S self in its aspect of me, capital M, me, as being composed of certain feelings, tastes, likes, dislikes, habits, peculiar ties, characteristics, etc., all of which go to make up his personality, or the self, capitalized S, self, known to himself and others. He knows that these emotions and feelings change, are born and die away, are subject to the principle of rhythm and the principle of polarity, which take him from one extreme of feeling to another. He also thinks of the me, capital M, me, as being certain knowledge gathered together in his mind and thus forming a part of himself. This is the, quote, me of man, of a man. But we have proceeded too hastily. The, quote, capital M, me of many men may be said to consist largely of their consciousness of the body and their physical appetites, etc. Their consciousness being largely bound up with their bodily nature, they practically, quote, live there. Some men even go so far as to regard their personal apparel as a part of their, quote, me, and actually seem to consider it a part of themselves. A writer has humorously said that, quote, men consist of three parts, soul, body, and clothes, end quote. These, quote, clothes, conscious, end quote, people would lose their personality if divested of their clothing by savages upon the occasion of a shipwreck. But even many who are not so closely bound up with the idea of personal raiment stick closely to the consciousness of their bodies being their, quote, me, end quote. They cannot conceive of a self, capital S self, independent of the body. Their mind seems to them to be practically, quote, a something belonging to, end quote, their body, which in many cases it is indeed. I'm going to stop there. That is a huge thing to consider, okay? And these days, that is true, and it has been capitalized upon by Hollywood, creating celebrity out of the external me. And the celebrity believes that, or we believe that the celebrity's me is who they are, but it isn't. And because we have television, tell-lie-vision, we actually believe that if the character plays many seasons, that that person is that character and they are playing their me or even someone else's me in the show. And then in meditation, you discover that there is an I, which is connected to God, and that the me is really superficial and is just what you're putting forward. It's the ego. Um, and if you ever get into really deep meditation where you're seeking enlightenment, then you are trying to become aware of the awareness, aware of the being that is aware, in which case you would be merging into the all. And that would probably be maybe a superconscious being or just merging into the all. I'm not really sure about that, but it's definitely something to contemplate. And I'm going to stop there so that people who are listening to this podcast show thing I'm doing will take a week to try to become aware of the two, the I and the me, and see how much of the me is actually running the show and how much the I is actually taking a back seat, or the other way around. Or maybe they're balanced in you. But I think it's important to pause and consider this, because if we're going to gain power in the situation that we're in, we need to really be aware of this fact, these facts in ourselves, and then look at society and what's going on in society with people and observe their I and their me that they're trotting out there. And it's celebrated because the me consumes, whereas the I does not. So in our materialistic society, the me is being celebrated, and the me is what is being catered to. The me is the one that, chooses the grande macchiato with soy, blah, blah, and a cherry on top rather than just having a cup of coffee. The I would have a cup of coffee, whereas the me has to be catered to. It's very every differentness self. And that's what's being celebrated right now in our society is quote unquote diversity. So therefore our me is being celebrated, which means therefore our ego is being stroked. And the ego is never satisfied. And so it becomes a consumer and it falls prey to all of this BS. So, for example, if you were in the hurricane and you lost everything, you could be walking around naked there. You would be your I then. Hopefully your me would, it's the type of thing that's so devastating that you would have a spiritual experience or you would die. You'd either have a spiritual experience where you would recognize your true nature, your true self. You would have shed all of your accoutrement of modern society, and you would be identifying with your true nature, your true self, I. So with that, I'm going to pause until next time.